Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming, and thank you for being interested in this topic. So I have two mantras, especially during election year. One of them is I love democracy, and democracy is a government for and by the people. And my second mantra is democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy doesn't work if we don't participate, and if we don't participate actively. So those are sort of the two things that I live by. And just taking action is something that I've always done anyway. So I was born in 1945, the day that World War II ended with Japan. Right. And it was a time when democracy triumphed over autocracy. And I grew up in such an ideal time. And democracy was really, you know, every film was patriotic and, patriotism, equality, and justice for all, and democracy prevailed. And I grew up thinking everybody loved democracy. And it's only recently, I'm 78, that I realized that not everybody loves democracy the way that I do. But I think I'm of a generation that idealized the concept. And I felt really naive this year when I finally realized that not everybody loves democracy. How could they not? You know, it just is amazing to me that they don't. So anyway. Also, right after World War II, there was this unprecedented economic boom. So equality and justice in the middle class expanded. And so I just sort of thought that's the way the world always has been, and the United States has always been. That if you work hard enough, you too can succeed. And for a lot of people, that was true because we had such an ideal economic situation. And again, because I didn't know history, and I only had my small little world, I grew up in a Japanese-American enclave, and I really never went outside that enclave until I was in college. And actually, even graduating undergrad, I was with Japanese-Americans on that campus. So it was only when I joined the Peace Corps, and I went to Thailand, that I met people from all over the United States. I didn't know there was a difference between Catholics and Protestants. I didn't know they didn't like each other. I didn't know people in Boston had strange accents, or people from Texas. So it was a great equalizer. And I think men who were drafted into the Army had that opportunity to really see a cross-section in the United States. But my friends from the Peace Corps told me I was the most naive person they ever met. Because I was just so isolated. I didn't know very much about the world at all. So my parents were incarcerated during World War II, and they were incarcerated because of their national origin, and it was Japan, and they were also incarcerated because of their race. So we were at war with Germany and Italy. They were not mass incarcerated. A few of them were incarcerated, but they had due process. There was a charge against them, and they were prosecuted, and some of them were found guilty and then put in jail. My parents were put in jail because of the way they looked. And half of the 120,000 people were US citizens like my parents were. So it's very strange. The community's reaction to that was, first of all, there were only 4 people out of the 120,000 people that resisted and said, I won't go. It's against the law. And those 4 people went to federal prison. Eventually they had their convictions overturned. And 3 of them got the Medal of Honor for being patriotic enough to resist injustice by our government. So the incarceration, the other half of the people that were incarcerated thought, well, I have to prove that I'm a loyal American. And they became super patriots. My parents voted every election. They would take me to the polls, put me in the booth with them, and show me what they were doing. And again, what they were trying to do is prove that they were good citizens. So that's the model that I grew up with.
So did they, I've heard of lots of incarcerated Japanese people losing their business, their home, did something like that happen to your parents also?
Well, they were very poor to start with. So they didn't have very much to lose,
Wow.
but they lost whatever they had. However, you know, I have a set of Japanese Girl Scout dolls that were very precious. And my family bought them in 1939. And I put them out every year. And somehow they made it through the war, even though things Japanese were forbidden. They were not allowed to have them. Somebody stored them for them. So there were reparations for Japanese Americans, and I was part of that movement as a third generation Japanese American. And it took 20 years. So it took 20 years of activism, and it took 20 years of resistance from within our community. It's interesting, people who have had a lot of injustice and who were in jail, they felt shame and embarrassment. And they did not want to be reminded that that had happened to them. So when I started talking about reparations, my parents were embarrassed and they didn't want me to talk about it, and it brought up terrible feelings for them. But in the end, it turned out to be a healing process. And in the end, each person who was still alive, unfortunately, many of them had passed by the time it happened. Each person who was incarcerated got $25,000. And Japanese Americans are right now very, very active in Black reparations. So there's a national coalition of Japanese American organizations working for Black reparations. And there's a multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition nationally working on that as well. Because we know we would have never gotten reparations without the help of the Black community. So, and the Black people in Congress. Our own Congress people were embarrassed and didn't want to bring it up. They thought it threatened their political futures. So, anyway, so the incarceration, ironically, made us more patriotic and instilled in us a strong belief in democracy and community spirit. Because I was in that enclave, I knew everybody and everybody knew me. I could not do any wrong without my parents knowing within 5 minutes what I had done. So, but I grew up in that very strong community. And one of the reasons why we had a community is we could not live just anywhere. I grew up in Denver, Colorado. So there was redlining everywhere in the United States. And Japanese Americans and other people of color had to live together. And because of that, ironically, again, we had a strong sense of community and mutual protection. Japanese Americans are famous. Yes?
I just wanted to say, could you explain what redlining is? Because I'm just not sure.
Okay, redlining was an informal, not formal, policy of realtors. And I don't know how formal it was.
Well, actually, I was stunned. I was born in 1960, so 15 years younger than you, but I was stunned when I bought my house in Manhattan Beach to see in the original grant deed from the 1930s that you could not sell this property to someone of non-European ancestry.
Yeah. Wow.
And it was like, wow, I knew that existed in the Jim Crow South. I had no idea it existed in the 1930s in California.
Yes.
And it was a legal document. It was in the grant deed that said you cannot sell this property to anyone of non-European ancestry.
Right.
Yeah.
So those
We
were
bought ours in
covenants and public policy, but not a government thing that said, actually in Seattle, there's a waterway, and anything north of that waterway, people of color could not buy property. So, and that was, that was in the late 60s, that still existed.
Yeah, I don't know when that actually was no longer enforceable, but it was written down in the 30s.
Yeah.
69.
Yes.
I'm from a mixed marriage,
Mhm.
and we were told we could not live in Manhattan Beach by a realtor.
Wow.
Went to the realtor and he just flat out, you cannot buy it.
What year was that?
That was 74.
And what did you do about that?
I found another realtor.
That was easy.
And out of spite, maybe, I moved in Manhattan Beach.
Right, exactly. So you know how that dynamic works. You face discrimination and somehow that makes you more resolved. We're talking about equality and justice, and so damn it, we're gonna have that.
I'm gonna live here.
Right,
I walked the streets to get them, all that. Took her, she was a little kid, and we went to our art department, and my husband and I, and she assigned in there for rent, and we'd go in there, we just rented, and all the way through. And I got a lot of tales to tell.
yeah, I'm sure you did.
Yeah.
So, the other thing I wanted to talk about is that my grandma came to the United States in the very late 1890s. She lived in the US for 60 years. She had 12 children. She raised them by herself. There was no social welfare in those days. One of her sons, my Uncle Joe, who I'm named after, was killed in Italy right before the end of the war. In 1945, and he got a Purple Heart. And she was not allowed to become a citizen until 1952.
Wow.
She was considered an alien, ineligible for citizenship. So alien is a word that triggers me, it pisses me off.
Now you're from
So-
another universe.
Right, from another planet.
Well, that is
So-
a repurposing of the word.
But I remember when my grandma became a citizen, she was so proud. And she was so proud to be a citizen. Again, she voted every election. She didn't speak very good English, or she did, she hid that from us because she really wanted us to learn Japanese. But she was super patriotic and she voted every election. So my background is a mix of patriotism, belief in the American way, racism, discrimination. I sort of faced all of that, and yet in the end, I became a super citizen, and all of that motivated me. My dad was a super volunteer within the community, so I grew up with that sense of community because we all knew each other. It was a small enclave, but also my dad demonstrated to me that you needed to participate, you needed to help each other. And Japanese, the way that we started businesses is everybody would pool their money, and then one person got to start their business. And then they'd pool their money again when they had enough, someone else started their business.
Because the banks would not
No,
give Japanese people a fair deal.
right. So self-sufficiency and community support, working together, those are all things that I grew up with. And it motivates me. It motivates me every day, and it motivates me in my life. So what I'd like you to do is talk to the person on your right and tell them, discuss, I'm going to give you 5 minutes each. Tell that person what you learned from your parents about democracy and being a good citizen. What I love is a discussion group where people are discussing. That's great.
Could
So-
we see if anybody on Zoom wanted to say
Oh,
anything?
yes,
'Cause they-
sure.
can't
How do
see
we
you on
do
Zoom.
that?
Can you power up the Zoom? The screen?
Oh, that's what the screen's for.
That's what it's yeah.
And the mic.
And,
I know the mic,
Oh, I don't have
You don't have it?
it. It's not.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Okay, let's go ahead. It's gonna take a while.
Oh, yeah.
Well, if anybody has anything to say, you can try.
I think Ron was on there.
yeah.
I'm not sure how to.
So did you learn something new about the person that you talked with?
Yes.
Yes.
That's the wonder of conversation. So I'm gonna just talk a little bit more while we're setting this up. So not only am I super patriotic because of the way that I was raised, I was also raised to be a volunteer. So serving the community, and when I was in high school, I remember there were all kinds of opportunities to work with schools and orphanages and things like that. I did that. And when I was in college, I was active in student organizations. I remember we made dinner for 500 people. We didn't know, I come from a restaurant family, so it seemed like it was okay, but cooking shrimp for 500 people, my hair was just covered in grease.
Oh, man, especially that. Yeah. Pasta, maybe, but shrimp, wow.
But since I was raised in this enclave that was very insular, my dream was to get away. And the only way that I could escape was to join the Peace Corps. It was sort of like the equivalent of joining the Foreign Legion. So I joined the Peace Corps, and my partner there also was in the Peace Corps. She was in Malaysia. I was in Thailand, and we were in the Peace Corps about the same time.
Oh, wow.
So I lived in Thailand for 2 years. And then, surprisingly, the hard thing was coming back to the United States. So after 2 years living in a very different culture, coming back, I went to Berkeley. It was 1968. So like, oh my gosh, what happened to my country? So I left. I chickened out and I left, and I went to Berlin, Germany for 4 years. And what's so interesting about that is Germany, the German culture and the US culture are more similar. The Thai culture was very different. So it was easier somehow living in an opposite culture than it was living in a culture where things were similar and nuanced differences. And also, I was able to see the United States. When I was in Thailand, I was pretty isolated. I was in a little village that had 500 people, and I got Newsweek once a week, and that's all I knew. But when I was in Germany, I was much more informed about what was happening in the US. And this was early 70s. Lots of things were happening in the United States. That was a time of assassinations, the murder of the Black Panthers by the FBI. I mean, there was a lot of injustice happening at the time. And I was in Germany, and I was watching it, and I felt that I really needed to go home and be a part of it, because I had chickened out. That's the country. So I did go back. But I think living in those two countries for 6 years really gave me, again, a sense of US culture and how US culture works and doesn't work. I see US history as a history of the expansion of democracy and the contraction of democracy. So when democracy was established in the United States, democracy and the people meant rich white men. And our history, all of the constitutional amendments are about expanding who the people were. And every time we expanded that definition, there was a contraction. And that's what's happening now. We're having a contraction of democracy. Voting rights are being threatened, much more difficult to vote. Education is being threatened. What we can say in schools is being politicized and restricted. So we're having a contraction right now. And I think this 2024 election is probably the most important election of my life. I'm 78 years old. And the polarization and the restriction of voting rights and the apathy and the hopelessness. So I hear many of my friends just complain about, gee, there's nothing to be done. We just can't do anything. And that's actually why Terry invited me here. So she asked me, and she just said, I just feel so hopeless. What can we be doing this election? And I said, well, I have some ideas about that. So I do want to tell you about that. So do we have anybody who had any questions?
Or comments?
Hello, everybody. We have,
Well, they can unmute it, hopefully. Yeah.
Can we put them on the camera when they're?
Well, that depends on them.
That's right.
They've turned off their.
If that's a name, it's
Yeah.
a so that's their time.
so do any of the 5 people who are on Zoom have anything they want to say?
Hello, people on
Okay.
Zoom.
Complete
They
silence.
They have them now, so I guess.
All right.
Not me.
All right.
Can they hear us?
Well, I'm sure they wouldn't still be on Zoom.
Okay. All right.
They just don't have anything to say.
Okay, all right. So when I came back from Germany, I moved, well, first I went to Oregon State and I got a master's degree in education, and then I became a community college educator. And what drew me to the community college was the word community. And the whole purpose of community colleges was to access higher education to people who could not go before. You do not need a high school diploma to enter a community college. You do not need to live nearby, so you don't have to move to go to higher ed. Community colleges came to you. We had health services, we had counseling, we had financial aid. If you didn't know how to read, we could teach you to read. We had adult basic education. So it was a career that really suited my core values. And I love being in the community college, and I love teaching, even though when I went to college, that's the one thing I didn't want to be. I did not want to be a teacher, because women could be teachers or nurses, and I really didn't want to be traditional, but too bad. I ended up being a teacher. So I was a community college counselor, and when I did that, I was also very, very active in the Asian American community in Seattle. And Seattle is sort of unique in that there isn't one Asian group that's big enough to be powerful. So we had to band together in order to create political power, and we did. So Filipinos, Chinese, Japanese, Hawaiians, Cambodians, Vietnamese, all worked together, and they still do, and it's rather unique.
I'm curious though, post-World War II, getting the Japanese and Chinese to work together,
Yeah,
that must have been interesting.
well, it was the next generation.
Yeah,
That's right.
So it was my generation,
Right.
who was born after the war.
How did your parents feel about that?
My dad was pretty racist to the end, because
China did some, China suffered pretty horribly.
Oh, I know they did, and the
So-
Koreans,
Korea too.
yeah,
Yeah,
yes.
so
yes,
there were reasons for people to
Right.
have some
right,
bad feelings.
absolutely,
Of course, the people living in America didn't have anything to do with that,
right,
but.
exactly, exactly.
Uh,
So it's because we were the next generation, and didn't experience that.
Yeah, my wife's father also fought in World War II like my dad, but he fought on the other side, he was in the German army, so.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I married a German. But again, the next generation.
Yeah.
So,
My dad being Chinese, going through the Japanese, Sino-Japanese war, he spoke fluent Japanese.
Oh,
Really?
Yeah, because he figured if he wants to
survival.
be in business,
Mhm.
we had a choice in the university in Shanghai for a third choice language, between Russian and Japanese, you figure Russian is better.
Good choice. Yeah. So, volunteering ran through my career, and what I did in the Asian community was, first I was the president of the Japanese American Citizens League. That is the oldest Asian American civil rights group in the United States. It was formed in 1914, somewhere around there. And it's a citizens league. Again, there's that theme of patriotism. And they were the ones during World War II that said, we have to prove that we're loyal Americans. So the liberals in our community don't like the GACL. It's too conservative for them, but yeah. So I was active in the Japanese American Citizens League, which is a national organization. And then we formed several nonprofits, C3 organizations ourselves. So the Asian Community Leadership Program, there were corporate leadership programs within our community, but nothing about community-based leadership. And we were getting our first elected representatives, people my age, were being elected to the state legislature and actually to US Congress at that time. And what they wanted to do was pass that information on to the next generation because they learned it the hard way. They made lots and lots and lots of mistakes. So the way that we wanted to sustain that interest in politics and political power. And so we started a community leadership program, and we trained people in their 30s, people who had just graduated, were too mobile. They were leaving and getting married and going off and doing different things. So we were training people who were a little into their careers who were going to stay in Seattle. So that was the first thing I did, and I did that for 12 years. I ran that organization. And the second organization that I helped establish was called APACE, Asian Pacific Islanders for Civic Engagement. And it was all about voting and all about registering people to vote because our community didn't vote in high numbers. And it was really important for us in order to have political power, meaning a voice in policies that have something to do with our daily lives. We needed to actively participate. So we did that. And we did all different forms, but we started with a C3, a C4, and a PAC. So we had it all. And the organization that I'm going to tell you about, Common Power, has the same structure. So I know very well the lines between C3, C4. I really believe that everything is political. No matter what you do every day, it is a political act. So if I run the water when I'm brushing my teeth, that is a political statement about awareness or lack of awareness about scarcity of natural resources. So C3 organizations cannot advocate for particular candidates or particular parties, but what they can do is talk about public policy. So APACE first got established because we were fighting an anti-affirmative action initiative. It first passed in California, and then that same political machine moved to Washington and eliminated affirmative action in Washington as well. But we formed a pan-racial, multi-ethnic, statewide organization to fight that initiative. And while we lost, we didn't lose in the Puget Sound, the western part of the state, but we lost in the eastern part of the state. And so affirmative action became against state law. But we had a few cities like Tacoma, they happened to have a black mayor. She stood up and said, too bad, we're gonna have affirmative action in this city, and if you want federal funding, you need to have affirmative action. So there was resistance. And that's the other thing I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about, as we expanded our democracy to include more and more people, when there was contraction in the taking away of some of those rights, there has always been resistance. And what that takes is courage. And the willingness to stand up and be active and do something about it. So I asked, what did you do about it when you faced, you can't live in Manhattan Beach because you're in a mixed marriage? What do you do about it? What do you do about it? And it does take courage. I think democracy also takes the thing that makes America difficult and with democracy is our rugged individualism. When you have too much individualism, you don't have a sense of common purpose, that we're working together, that we need to help each other. And I really feel that now in our society, this lack of a common good. And democracy thrives with that. And we have to build that in order to participate in democracy and make it healthier and better. So that is a threat. And I remember Clarence Thomas, when he was going through the hearings for Supreme Court, he just insisted that he did it all by himself. Yeah, I pulled myself up by my own bootstraps. There isn't one person in the United States that is where they are because of their own individual efforts. So that sense of the common good. So I think that's a threat.
When you talk about the rugged individualism, I think we saw that this week with the bump stock for the guns, you know, because they're making a decision for the individuals, disregarding the common good for children and other people.
So lately I've been studying a lot of history. I take a lot of seminars, actually through Common Purpose. Let me tell you about the organization first, and then I'll tell you some of the things that I learned about them. Common Power, they used to be called Common Purpose. It was started by a professor in communications from the University of Washington. He is an acute political observer, and he loves data. So he has all these charts and he gathers all this information, but his analysis of what races nationally are important and where the vote is going to make the difference is something that I really trust, because he does his homework. So he established this organization, and first of all, it was just taking students and rich white people to the South on civil rights tours. And the reason why he did that is the rich white people paid for the young students of color to be able to go on these trips. And it was intergenerational, sort of conveniently, but it also turned out to be a very rich learning experience. So these tours were multiracial, multi-generational, and that's still the structure of that organization. They make a concerted effort to make sure that young leaders of color are being educated and brought into civic engagement work. But they take these tours, and I had the privilege of going on one a couple years ago. So we went into the South, and we talked to the civil rights foot soldiers, the people who are on the ground and who are still doing the work 60 years later. One of the women was 9 years old, and she did the Selma March. And the first time they went across, she was beaten, and they were thrown back into the city. During that night, many people were killed and beaten up, and she was 9 years old. She got up and she marched to Selma the next day. Selma to Montgomery. So we got to meet people who were the foot soldiers and talk with them and see what their life experiences were. And somehow I know history, I knew it, but I didn't know it. And going on that tour and being there where human beings were sold touches me in a way that just, I hadn't experienced before. So they say these tours are life-changing, and they are. And for the young people, they understand the privilege it is and how many people died for them to be able to vote. And they will always vote. And they will always participate. Yes.
Can I say something on that, since, well, I have we had students from China living with us to finish their education at Long Beach State. And now we have, I call them my grandchildren. And one of them is 24, and she just graduated, well, 2 years ago, she graduated from Berkeley. And she had applied for a grant. Her father is Jewish, and she has just been awarded this grant.
And her mother's Chinese.
Yeah. And, yeah, her mother's Chinese and her father is Jewish. And they picked up the Jewish after her father died. But anyway, and she has just received a grant to an organization to do something with the Black Jewish and the mixing them up. Very pretty girl.
Yeah.
And I'm just so proud of that family.
Right.
That they have become very good citizens of the United States.
Yeah. On college campuses, there's organizations called Generation Mix.
Yeah.
There's many mixed race people.
Yeah.
And it used to be in our community, people would be embarrassed to be mixed race. Now they're proud and strong.
And I always said, this generation are a result, of course, you guys and me and everybody else.
Yeah, we had something to do with it.
So we had to instill this something within them, but they're going to save this union. They're going to save this union. They're more diverse, they're smarter, and they're going to do okay by us.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I've got 3 or 4 mixed kids, and they're not going to, deny a mother or a father. And just wait and depend on them and encourage them.
I love that. I love the hope that's in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was just so thrilled when she said, I got the grant.
Yeah, that's
I
great.
got it about 3 or 4 weeks ago.
So Common Purpose does civic engagement. So they register people to vote, they door knock. So the 3 most effective ways to get the vote out is door knocking, actually going to the doors and talking to people. The second most effective way is talking on the telephone with them, if you can actually get someone on the phone these days. And the third most effective way is either doing postcards, which I brought, writing postcards or letters, and there's several, what did I do with it? Several organizations here. There's several organizations that do that. So Terry participated with me. I have my friends over, we have coffee, we eat, we talk, which builds community, and we write postcards. So this particular set of postcards, the first list that I got, were for New Mexico Native American voters. They're low propensity voters, meaning they typically don't vote because they always felt disenfranchised. Why should I bother? But we handwrite postcards to them and say, please, please vote. And this particular organization tells us what to write because they've done the research about what's most effective that will motivate people to actually vote. So we're gonna mail these July 1st. There's another organization, it's called Vote Forward, and their sole purpose is to get people to vote. Their goal is to send 10 million letters this year. My girlfriend last year sent 3,000 letters. So she paid for the paper and the postage and the envelopes, and she personally organized 3,000 letters. It filled up a closet in her house. That's how many letters. This year, she is committed to do 10,000. So I have a stack, because I'm gonna help her, to personally do that, and I'm gonna have some parties and have people come over and write. And this particular format is, we just write one paragraph, or not even paragraph, you can write one sentence. So I vote because, and you can write whatever you want in there. But again, it's the third most effective way to get the vote out. And it's sort of painless. You can do it individually, maybe while you're waiting for your clothes to dry in the dryer. You can do 10 of them and get them ready. Or you can have parties, which is my favorite thing, because I'm an extrovert. So that's a way to participate. So Common Purpose has their own voting letter campaigns, or what they actually do is they work with local organizations. They work nationally, and they do the analysis of where the vote is the most important. We know California, oops, I'm not supposed to say it. So they work in states where they think the vote's really going to be critical. And
You were gonna say California isn't very critical.
yeah, we're not critical.
We all know that.
Yeah. Well, okay. So they do a lot of civic engagement, voter registration, get out the vote work, and education. So they have a whole educational institute, and I listen to lectures, or I take courses, like three lecture series, and they have professors from all over the United States that are particularly well informed about history that we typically do not know. There's so much history that is not spoken. And the more I learn, the more adamant I get. So it inspires me, and it sustains the work, because this work can be very discouraging. You go out and you door knock, and you knock on 100 doors, and you actually get to talk to 2 people. You have to believe that those 2 people are going to vote. And elections these days are won by 5 votes. There was some state assembly primary where the difference was 5 votes. In the state of Washington, the governor won by 20 votes. It was virtually a tie. So with our technology, we can actually count much more accurately, and 1 vote does make a difference. So Common Purpose, Common Power is really into getting that 1 vote out, each and every vote. So they do that. They do education, and they do what they call youth leadership program. They actually pay students. They're usually seniors in college or recent graduates to take this seminar over 6 weeks. And it's a civil rights, civic engagement curriculum. And out of those cohorts, they choose people to employ. And they usually choose young, passionate people of color who come to the work. And right now they have 16 employees. But right now they just started a new round of education for young leaders. It's 200 people nationally. They do it online, but they also make sure that they get to meet each other in person and talk to each other, because our discussion and talking to each other is really important in terms of building community and that sense of the common good. So they do civic engagement, and the youth leadership program is called the Action Academy, because their goal is to get people active and participating. So I want to read you their vision. Their vision is to foster, support, and amplify a democracy that is just and inclusive. We still have a long way to go. and their mission is to provide creative on-ramps to civic fieldwork, to expand people engaging and benefiting from it, and sustaining and investing in the next generation of leaders. So those are all things, I share those values, and I love the way that they are organized. And they're a young organization, and just seeing the energy, they just sent out people, 50 volunteers. Again, it's a mix of ages, mostly seniors who have the time and the resources to travel, and young people that they've trained through the Action Academy. They go out together and they door knock. And they just went to Nevada, 104 degrees, and they knocked on 2,000 doors in a matter of 4 days. Yeah, so, and they just had their primary, and we like the results, so. Action works. All right, so I just want to ask what you think that you might do in this election. Is there something?
Well, the last time we did the postcarding, and Mom, I pretty much wrote the postcarding, and then she signed also from the 97-year-old.
Oh, that's great.
I think it kind of
Well, they
had an
get
effect. That was
the
War Knock, and that was for the the Georgia election. And
War Knock.
Yeah, the letters that I have, the stack that I have are for Michigan.
Yeah.
Michigan voters, yeah. But it doesn't feel good to be able to do that. Yeah.
I made a lot of mistakes, but she corrected them.
And our goal.
We didn't print them, we wrote them.
Our
Yeah.
goal, kind of to begin, is just to write to all of our family. Mom is actually considering calling everybody,
That's a good
especially all
idea.
those young people, to vote. But I mean, we have politics on television the entire time my mother's here, so.
Yes. What about the church? Would they do a postcarding or a letter writing activity?
Get together as a group.
We have to be careful not to do political activity, but I mean, clearly if you're just telling people you ought to vote.
Right, that's what you're doing. The letters that Vote Forward is doing, they have QSR codes on them. So they are tailor-made to each individual voter. So there's a name and address that you address this letter to, but each of these QSR codes are for that specific voter. So if they do this QSR code, they'll know whether they're registered or not, and this QSR code tells them how to vote. So you can vote by mail or whatever the situation is in your particular place.
When you say how to vote, is that, you mean, that tell them
How to
where to go to vote?
Where to vote, or you can vote by mail, or you can go to your local precinct.
Okay.
So, yeah, not who to vote for.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to clarify.
No. Civic engagement work, C3 work, does not talk about individual candidates or advocate for particular candidates. It is getting the vote out and expanding democracy. So, what else can we be doing this year? And I have to tell you, participating, sometimes I get really discouraged and depressed because it seems like we're in such disarray. And our disarray is nothing compared to our history. So people have stood up and they've taken action and they have resisted the contraction of democracy. So it just helps me knowing that there's people before me that had courage who died, and I'm going to do everything that I can.
I get afraid when I, too much, when I give my opinion, and I'm sort of afraid now to even approach people. Because I don't know whose message is being taken back to who, and all this kind of stuff. So it really makes you afraid to put a sign in your car.
But that's exactly,
And you're afraid, because I've known people that, Sheila's best friend, her nephew was just shot. And I imagine they must have had somehow to do with who knows, a sign in the window. Because they weren't doing anything but driving down the street.
well, we can't let fear stop us.
No.
I lived in Santa Barbara, and many elections ago, I could not keep my person for president sign.
That's
No matter
right.
where I put it, somebody would take it and destroy it. I even put it inside, up by the roof, and they came in and got it.
Wow. Yeah, our sign the last election got taken several times and stuff. And I'm trying to find, where do you find a vote sign, a yard sign?
Yeah, make it your own. It has more meaning than a mass-produced sign. I'm voting, will you? Something like that, handwritten.
Right,
I actually got, if you look on Amazon, they do probably sell them.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm sure.
I was going to make one and I never managed, so.
I go on Amazon and find
And
it.
find it.
Yeah, that's true.
I think we're making women go look at Amazon, that's kind of, yeah.
Maybe just go your block and put flyers, and reminder of, voting.
It's
Just
time
one
to.
block at a time.
And you'll know when you get your ballot in the mail, that now's the time to go around your neighborhood and remind, hey, have you filled out your ballot yet? Have you mailed it? Just little nudges. I love your idea, though, of calling your family, because in so many families, we don't talk about politics. It's one of those taboo topics. And yet, that's exactly what we need to do. We need to be able to talk to people who have different beliefs than we do. If we don't dialogue, how are we ever going to build community? We're not. We're going to stay isolated in these silos that don't talk to each other. We can't build a common good without that. And it's so hard. I know, it's so hard. I have to bite my tongue. I have to open my ears. I can feel them shut. I have to open them. I shut.
The young people in our family know that if they're not registered, as soon as they can register, they get a phone call.
That's great. That's
From
great.
the oldest member of the family.
That's great. That's great.
Do they answer the phone? Yeah.
When
When the queen calls.
Mary?
Do they still, you don't see people signing up voters so much like outside of grocery stores. I mean, I don't know, does that still work? Because now that they have it through your driver's license in California.
Right. It's not as necessary.
Yeah.
And also you can register, depends on what state you live in, same day registration, automatic registration. Those are all things that we just passed in Washington less than 10 years ago. So,
I'm just wondering why they don't make high schoolers as a requirement for graduation to register to vote.
well, how about,
Something
They're not all
we
in.
could-
why don't we teach civics? We don't anymore.
No, we don't.
Really? Things have changed.
That's, again, part of the contraction of democracy, making it less inclusive. School board, we were talking about that in our breakout group. School board elections are really important.
Yeah.
And young people are not getting basic civics. So we organize, and the church might do this, have a ballot party. So everybody brings their ballot and you just say, what does this office do? What does the Secretary of State do? You just inform people about what these offices are, and you don't have to say a thing about the candidates. It's what do these offices do? How do you vote? How do you make sure your ballot's going to be counted? Where do you sign it? That's what a ballot party is. So that's something an organization like a church could do.
The League of Women Voters is going to some of the high schools at least, and what they're doing is, apparently as a kid, you can pre-register if you're gonna be 18 by the time. So they're pre-registering, well, obviously schools have that, but they were pre-registering 17-year-olds and registering the 18-year-olds in, schools, so.
And you could do that here. That's a perfect C3 thing. Every Sunday, you could have a booth to register people.
That's a good idea.
Well, it would be nice to do that even at Mira Costa. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
They're
it's
in
right
the store,
there,
yeah.
it's right there,
Yeah.
yeah.
Something to think about.
I'm sure they have summer school, or in the fall.
That's
In the
right.
fall,
In the
the
fall,
first
yeah.
orientation
Yeah.
week, that's the best time to do it.
Yeah,
Because the election will be on everybody's minds,
yeah,
so,
that's an idea.
yeah. Good ideas. What else? What else will you do individually, or what could this organization do? How many parishioners do you have?
Wow, really?
I think we have, how many? About 200 that are semi-active and maybe 150 that are very active in our church.
That's about right, 150.
Yeah, it doesn't take many. It just takes concerted effort. So Common Para has a staff of 16. That's not very many to do this national work and to field as many volunteers as they do. So it
Would
doesn't
you
take many.
provide us with the information on these two
Yes,
letter writing
yeah.
organizations?
yes, so it's just commonpower.org.
That's the one with the postcards?
Well, yeah. So the postcarding is just a subset of everything else that they do, but through Common Power, you can find out how to postcard.
And what about the one?
The other
with
one's,
With the
vote-
QR codes, which
Yeah.
sounded really interesting.
yes,
Yeah.
it's called Vote Forward, and their website is fwd.org. Vote Forward. If you just put Vote Forward in, it will come up.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about how to spell it.
And so if I was interested, for instance, in doing that, they would send me these pre-made letters?
They would send you a list, and you have to print them yourself.
Right, but they'll send me a link to print them.
Right,
Okay,
right,
because that really sounds like a very effective thing.
yes.
Sorry,
Yes.
but it's getting late, so.
That's
Wait
fine.
about a minute.
Thank you for coming. Yes, so you print them, you buy the envelopes, you get the stamps, and it tells you very specifically when to mail them, because timing is critical. So, yeah. Anything?
Thank you, Akemi.
Oh, well, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Well, I don't do enough,
Thank you so much, though, for talking to us.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to come
Thank you,
here.
Terry, for.
Yes, thank
Yeah.
you, Terry.
You're welcome.
It was a great suggestion.